Savannah, and welcome to the Third Eye Journey. This channel is dedicated to my reproductive health history and my new journey as a 22-year-old woman with an impending hysterectomy. So today I wanted to get on and first say welcome. Thank you for engaging in this channel and going on this journey with me. But I also wanted to come on here and share my reproductive health history with you. I think that in doing this, I'll give you guys a little bit of insight as to what I've been going through throughout the years and how all of those things have brought me to where I am now. So let's go ahead and get started. So I think the best place for me to start would be, when did I get my period? I actually got my period when I was 9. It was the summer of my 3rd grade year, and it was really interesting for me because I wasn't expecting it. You know, you have health classes in elementary school, but you typically don't get into those until you're, in 4th grade. So I didn't really have a lot of knowledge on that, but thankfully I had an amazing mom who was also a teacher, and she made sure that I was highly educated on what I was going through, what my body was doing, and why. So she was kind of in shock. She cried. So she went out and she got me quite a few different books that were relatively kid-friendly, and I love to read, so I was definitely engaged within those books, and I did a lot of reading and worked really hard to make sure I understood what was going on, and also to make sure that I understood how to take care of my body. So I'll say when my period started at that age, it was relatively light, but they weren't necessarily regular. And I think that's one thing that I can say that was consistent throughout my reproductive health journey, is that my periods were never really regular. Going into 4th and 5th grade, my periods got heavier. They were extremely painful. The cramps were awful, sometimes to the point where I didn't even want to go to school. But, I suffered through it like everyone does. Unfortunately, periods are one of those things where they're painful for every woman, and it's one of those things that we have to deal with. It's part of our lives, and it's one of those things that we cope with as women. From then on, we moved to North Carolina. I'm originally from Virginia, so we did move to North Carolina, and as I found myself getting older, going on into middle school, I noticed that my periods were getting increasingly worse, and I kind of started experimenting with different sanitary products and found that my periods were so heavy to the point where I felt that I needed to double up. So a typical day for me on a period, I would typically double up tampons and pads to kind of get through those days, because I was at the point where my period was so heavy that I was ruining my clothes frequently, messing up car seats, several things that we often go through as women. But I think it's easy for me to say that those incidences were far more frequent as I got older. Middle school was definitely a difficult time for me, because that was when my reproductive health and my hormonal health really, really started to shift. And one of the biggest shifts that I had during this time was I started to develop fibroid adenomas in my breast. I found a lump in my right breast. I want to say it was in 8th grade. And that was really difficult for me because cancer runs in my family. We have a long history with it. Definitely breast cancer, as well as other different types of cancer. So I was terrified. And it was about a 6th to 7th month journey of moving on to surgery and having that lumpectomy. And during this time, I was frequently introduced to going to an OBGYN. And I will say that my OBGYN at the time, she was wonderful. She really took a very huge role in advocating for my health. Which I was extremely thankful for, because the other doctors, the surgeon that I had, and the other different specialists that I would go to, they didn't really attempt to even try to sympathize with me. They kind of treated me as though, oh, she's just overreacting. We don't understand why she feels she needs the surgery. If she were my daughter, I would tell her to just leave it. And they seemed not to understand at the time that I was a child. And those are things that children don't go through. So for myself, I was terrified and I just wanted to be done with it. I didn't want it there anymore. I wanted my body back, which was understandable. And my OBGYN agreed with me. So we pushed forward with moving toward surgery. And that year I was able to get the lump removed. Around this time, especially with a lot of the heavy medications, and I was under so much stress with what was going on, I noticed that my periods became increasingly heavy. And, at this point, I was going through about 1.5 boxes of tampons a week. My mom kind of started to catch on with how much sanitary product that I was going through because, of course, I wasn't buying them. She was typically buying them. And she had her concerns, but she also knew that in terms of reproductive health, you never really know how your body's going to shift as you get older. And even though my periods were really heavy, it's not necessarily abnormal or uncommon for young women as they get older to experience rapid and extreme changes within their cycle. So she kind of sensed that things were kind of changing for me, but she would ask questions. I'd answer as best as I could, and then we kind of move on from there. Going into high school was definitely difficult. And one of the biggest things for me during high school was that I really began to understand that reproductive health, hormonal health, and stress definitely go hand in hand. And this is kind of something that really has marked my journey from then on. Throughout high school, I was dealing with a lot of different health issues on top of what I was dealing with my periods. So I'd had a few issues with my ankle that required surgery. And going through that, with all that stress and everything that I was doing in school, I eventually started having chronic migraines. And anyone who's had a migraine knows that it is one of the most crippling things that you can ever deal with. I would have migraines that in the beginning would start off as dull aches, and they would get to the point where I couldn't be in daylight. I would wear sunglasses at night to alleviate the pain from, oncoming headlights from cars and going into stores. There were certain stores I couldn't go into because of the lighting that they had. It would, trigger a headache. So it was very difficult for me because anyone that knows me knows that I am very much a go-getter. So around that time, in spite of the fact that, mind you, I was still in some type of surgical boot or cast, from the issues I was having with my ankle, I was also in 3 to 4 different orchestras. I was with different in-school organizations and doing volunteering off campus. So at that point in my life, I was probably the most booked that I've ever been because I would be between all these different orchestras. I would get a lot of calls to do different gigs because I was so prevalent in all of these different orchestral groups. And when you pile that on with all of the work that you typically have as a high school student, because most of my classes at that point were AP classes, as well as the different organizations that I was involved with, I was shot. I honestly didn't have a lot of time for other things. I wasn't one of those kids that partied a lot or, got the opportunity to really hang out with their friends that much. So I was definitely deeply, deeply ingrained in my studies and my work that I was doing. And it became really difficult to get up and do things. I would have migraines that would last for 2 weeks, and I would be out of school for that length of time, and eventually I would have to go to a center to have an infusion that is typically administered to MS patients. So that was the level of pain that I was in at that time. I was in so much pain that they had to hook me up to an IV and, let the medication do its job. And the struggle with that is that once you have that much medication in your system, it takes a few days to get out of it. You're pretty hazy for about 2 to 3 days, and it takes a lot to really get back on your feet. So in a lot of ways, I had all of these different things going on, but at the same time, I was relatively immobile, which was heavily problematic. And in working with my neurologist, because I had a wonderful neurologist at the time, I was keeping track of the foods that I ate. I was keeping track of the times of the day that I would get migraines, the places that I would be where I would start having these migraines, but I would also keep track of my periods, which was extremely difficult at the time because they were never truly regular. And all of those different things that I tracked, I found that I would always get a migraine a few days before my period. And that was when myself, my gynecologist, and my neurologist really started to realize that my migraines were being brought on by the hormonal changes that were coming from my period. And that was kind of the start of me really understanding how all of these things really intertwine. Because the more stressed I would get, the worse my migraines would get. But also, I would have these hormonal shifts because of my period, and it would bring them on even worse. So around this time, once I really discovered this, and I was at a point where I was going through 1.5 to 2 boxes of tampons a week when I was on my period. And not only that, I would have bleeding in between my periods at this point. And I was really getting fed up with how frustrating it was. It was bad enough that I was dealing with all this other stuff on the side, but in dealing with my periods as well, I was just tired. So, I went back to my OBGYN. We talked about it, and she suggested that I started experimenting with birth control. So she put me on the pill, and I honestly cannot remember the name of that specific birth control that I was on at the time. It's relatively generic, and I think it's probably one of the birth controls that most people, are started on when they start venturing down that journey of going into birth control. And to be quite honest, if I knew what I knew now, and I didn't have those issues especially, I probably never would have touched birth control, because sexual activity wasn't an issue for me. So definitely knowing what I know now, I wish that I never really had gone down that route of experimenting with a lot of birth controls, because one thing that I can say is that I found that birth control never really helped me. If anything, it made my situations worse, or it kind of put a band-aid on what was happening, but nothing was actually getting better. So my doctor started me on this birth control, and it was a really difficult period of trying to get adjusted to it. And it was a very painful period for me, because I already had really rough, difficult cramping. But with being on this birth control, I found that my cramping got worse to the point where I would be nauseous. I would, wake up and I would be vomiting because the pain was so bad. And that was just heavily problematic for me, because even though it did alleviate a little bit of the bleeding, it made it a little more weak in terms of flow. It brought on a whole new set of issues for me. And one thing is that once you really start adding pain onto everything, it just it makes it 10 times worse. And mind you, I'm still dealing with chronic headaches. So I had pain on top of pain on top of pain. I eventually stopped this birth control. I just ended up weaning myself off of it because I wasn't a fan of being on it. I was essentially tired of using that birth control because it wasn't doing anything for me, and if anything, it was making me feel worse. And around that time that I had stopped, I was going into my senior year of high school, and things were a little bit better for me, especially because, my surgery was done. I had recovered. I had a little bit more self-confidence because I wasn't always limping around in a surgical cast or a boot. So I was able to really kind of take my senior year and embrace it and do a lot of the things that I wasn't able to do when I was dealing with this ankle issue. With that, my migraines did begin to die down. I still had them, but they weren't to the point that I'd had them in the years prior. So I was able to get a lot more work done. I still had the migraines, and it still impeded on my work and the things that I did, but they definitely weren't to the extent that I'd had them the prior year. But with that, my periods definitely did not get better. So at this point, I'm not on birth control anymore. I'm kind of just winging it and just letting things happen as they come. And yeah, it was rough. I definitely won't sit here and pretend that things were better during that year in terms of my periods. But at the same time, I was so focused on finishing that I just kind of dealt with it. I just, bought all the pads that I needed, bought all the tampons that I needed, left the house with an arsenal, and just tried to make it as best as possible in spite of the fact that I felt terrible. I really managed to finish that year strong, and I was really proud of myself for doing that because I was definitely at a point in my life where I wasn't very happy, but I still managed to make it anyway. So, getting out of high school, I'm going into my freshman year of college, and at this point, I'm noticing that things are definitely getting worse. And when I say worse, beyond the bleeding that I had, I think it's pretty much established now that I have terrible bleeding during my periods. But I found that I was having more and more frequent bleeding in between my periods, but I was also having a lot of discomfort in between my periods. And that's definitely not normal. And one thing that I can equate that discomfort to is it wasn't always pain, but it felt like a lot of pressure. It felt like someone was just sitting there and holding onto my uterus and just refused to let go. That became more and more bothersome to me as I went on. And with working with my OBGYN, it was really frustrating for me because it seemed like I'd gotten to a point where she didn't really care that much. It seemed like she wasn't as invested in my health and what was going on the way she was when I was in middle school. It seemed like as soon as I turned 18, it was just like, okay, whatever, you're an adult now. So, which was ridiculous in a lot of ways, because just because I was an adult doesn't mean that the things that I was dealing with were normal. The things that I was dealing with were not normal for someone that was 19. So I was kind of continuing on this journey, and I thought to myself, okay, well, let's try getting healthier. Like, let's try getting your body together. Let's try being more active. And I think one of my crowning achievements of my freshman year was that I didn't gain my freshman 15. I lost my freshman 15. In fact, by the end of that year, I had lost about 20 pounds. I was working out 5 times a week. I would take weekends off. I was definitely eating more veggies, balancing my veggies and my protein, taking my vitamins, drinking nothing but water. I was really convinced that I was like, maybe it's just that I haven't really been taking that great care of myself since I had my ankle surgery. My body's kind of flipped, so let's see what I can do to get it back. And even though I definitely felt better just in general because I was working out, because I was active, it didn't change anything that was happening in terms of my reproductive health. And it got to the point where the more I worked out, the more painful everything became afterward. And it got to the point where eventually I had to stop working out. So, with all of that information that I had, really tracking everything that was going on and seeing that periods weren't getting any better, I went to my doctor and I told her, I was like, I think it's time for me to try something new. I'm in a lot of pain. So, she didn't really take what I was saying seriously, which was frustrating. But she was like, okay, let's try another birth control. So, she put me on the Depo shot. And I'm pretty sure Depo is relatively familiar to a lot of women. And it's very familiar to us, especially in college, because it's easier. You don't have to go back and get the shot for another 3 months. It's not something that you have to make sure you remember to take every single day. So a lot of women choose to go on Depo because it's easier. You don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what choices you're going to make by the time you get into college. So it's a bit of a nice safety net. But a lot of people aren't aware of the problems that come with taking Depo. And I will definitely say that Depo didn't benefit me at all. Following the time where I started taking the shot, of course I went through the period that every woman goes through where it's just kind of confusing. You don't really know what's going on. You're having pain, but you don't really know why. You're not really having a period. And one of the biggest issues that I had on the Depo shot was that when I did have my periods, they would last for about 2 weeks. And in between, I would still have this random really heavy bleeding, and I would have mornings where I would wake up just covered in blood. It would look like a CSI crime scene, and that is no exaggeration. So I was definitely consistently having to wash my clothes, consistently having to wash my bed sheets, because the bleeding just wasn't getting any better. And even if the bleeding did slow down, I would be bleeding for 2 weeks. So I was at the point where I was anemic. I would have periods of time where my body was so drained that it got to the point where I couldn't even eat solid food. I was living off of like Special K protein shakes to kind of try to get some type of nutrition in, because just even looking at solid food would make me sick. That was extremely problematic for me because I had been so in tune to my body and I had really been working on my health. And at this point, it was like all of it went down the drain. One of the really big defining moments for me was when I had my first ovarian cyst. And that really showed me that these things weren't working. It had come around a period of time where I wasn't getting along with my roommate. And one thing that I will say to that is another issue that I had with the Depo was that it definitely affected my moods and my mental health. And I had become the type of person that I could get angry like that. I mean, I would just be at a level 0 and something would set me off and I would be at a level 200. Sometimes I would get so angry to the point where I would scare myself. And in taking that shot, I became somebody that I didn't really like. I definitely wasn't proud of the woman that I was that year. And my roommate had her own issues going on too, and it got to the point where everything came to a head. We got in a fight. She was sleeping in the room and I was sleeping in someone else's room. And I think this was the day before, right before our winter break. So I come back to my room and I was trying to pack my stuff up, trying to get my stuff together quick enough to not really have to interact with her at the time. And I'm folding my clothes and my friend's in the room. She's sitting down talking to me. And all of a sudden it feels like someone just walked into the room and stabbed me in my pelvis and just kept going, just wouldn't stop. The pain was to the point where my back locked up. I fell on the bed. I couldn't move. It was some of the worst pain that I'd ever felt in my life at that point. And mind you, I had chronic migraines, so I know a lot about pain. I definitely have a relatively high pain tolerance. So the fact that this knocked me down the way it did, it scared the crap out of me. I ended up having to go to the hospital, and that trip was typical. I eventually found out for these types of visits. You know, they got me in, hooked me up, gave me some heavy medications, had an ultrasound done, internal and external, and they found that I had an ovarian cyst on, I want to say it was my left ovary at the time. And with that, they were like, you know, we can't do anything for you here, but you need to take these records, take this imaging, go to your OBGYN and talk to them. So I did just that. I was going home anyway, so my parents were there the next day. They took me home, and I got an appointment with my OB. And she was just really nonchalant about the whole thing. It almost felt like she didn't care anymore. And that was the defining moment for me where I said, okay, enough is enough. I definitely didn't want the hospital visits to become frequent. And that was what was going to continue to happen if I didn't find somewhere else to be. So, I left that practice and I went to a different practice, got all of my records, got all of my information, found a new doctor. And for anyone that's in the Winston-Salem, North Carolina area, I'm with Novant Woman Care now, and I've gotten wonderful care since I switched over. The doctor that I had at the time, she was really great, and she was honestly extremely upset that I wasn't getting the help that I needed, and I didn't really have someone advocating for me the way that she felt they should. And she kind of went into this guns blazing, and she, you know, did all the imaging she needed to do, did all of the different tests that she needed to do, because she really wanted to get me at a place where we could get a diagnosis, because at this point I had no diagnosis. All I knew was that my periods were heavy, I had frequent bleeding in between, and I was extremely uncomfortable, and I was in a lot of pain. And on top of this, at this point, I had these ovarian cysts happening. So I started working with her. Once we kind of got all of that worked out, I was back in school for my last semester of my freshman year, and things definitely didn't get better. I stayed on the depot shop because I wanted to see if it was going to do anything. I wanted to give it the time that it needed, and it didn't. It definitely didn't. I went on from that point to all the way through my sophomore year, honestly, with insane bleeding. And eventually, during my sophomore year, I went off of the depot shot, and I kind of went rogue, and I didn't mess with any birth control. I was just kind of sick of the depot. It wasn't doing anything for me. If anything, it made me feel worse. And I definitely just wanted to rid my system of all of that medication at the time and just kind of let my body do its thing, see what was happening without the medication, and then go from there. And around this time, my doctor was really great. It was frustrating for her because there were a lot of things that didn't really add up, because when you looked at the symptoms I had and then you looked at me, you had the symptoms of a very unhealthy person, but you saw a very healthy person sitting in front of you. And with all the imaging that was done, my uterus looked healthy, my ovaries looked healthy. Like, there wasn't any telltale sign that I had a serious diagnosis or issue, aside from the one time that I had this ovarian cyst. And, I went through my sophomore year still dealing with the bleeding, still dealing with all of these issues, having to go to the hospital because I would bleed for more than 2 weeks, and I would need medical attention, and that was also difficult because most hospitals can't do anything for you, and I will say that the hospital that I was going to at the time, the level of care that they gave had definitely downgraded since the first time that I had been there. So I was just I was struggling, and I was just kind of coasting along the way I tend to do, pretending that I was okay and dealing with the problems as they came. So, getting closer to the end of my sophomore year, I was definitely still having the issues with the bleeding, and I was still having to make frequent hospital visits. So, I got to a point where I had to make an emergency appointment with my doctor because I had one of these instances where I did have to go to the hospital because I'd been bleeding so much. And at this point, I ended up switching to a different doctor. Not because there was anything wrong with the doctor that I had. She was absolutely wonderful. She was a really sweet person, and she tried her best to help me in any way that she could. But it was difficult to get appointments. The college that I go to is an hour and 30 minutes away from the healthcare practice that I frequent. So it wasn't always easy to get appointments with her when I needed them, especially if it was an emergency. So I ended up finding another doctor, and I think he was definitely a game changer for me, because even though the doctor prior had really taken the steps that were needed to look into my history and figure out what was going on, he really definitely built a team for me. He didn't just sit there and look at all the stuff himself and try to come up with something nice to tell me. He went through everything with my previous doctor. He went through everything with a couple of different doctors within that practice, looking at imaging and really saying, okay, what is going on here? Because at this point, I'm almost 21, and I'm dealing with things that women in their 30s and 40s typically deal with. So, with going through everything that they'd had on record for me, doing some more tests, doing some blood work, he came to the conclusion that it's time to go ahead and diagnose you with endometriosis. And one of the difficult things about endometriosis is that you can't always see it on normal imaging. Endometriosis can be anything. It can be anything from scar tissue on your uterus, scar tissue on your ovaries, to a fallopian tube that's twisted in on itself. And those things aren't always easy to see on an ultrasound, or even a CT. So he gave me the diagnosis. He was like, I think we've all come to the conclusion that you're dealing with endometriosis. You're just having a case right now where we can't necessarily pinpoint where it is. And I had already been through so much surgery not too long ago to where they didn't want to try to put me through too much surgery. So he brought up a new medication to me, which is called Lupron Depot. And essentially what Lupron Depot is, it is a shot that you get once every 3 months. It's similar to the Depot shot, but in the case of this shot, it's like medical menopause. It cuts everything off. And I did go through menopause when I was on this medication. But the whole idea behind the Lupron shot is that it will cut everything off so that your body has the time to actually heal itself. Because one thing that I learned in working with my doctors was that all of this definitely stemmed from the fact that I had heavy periods for a very long period of time, and they definitely got increasingly heavier as they went along. And what happens eventually is that when you're having extremely heavy periods, sometimes they can create scar tissue, and your body reacts. It wants to fix it, and through this cycle of your body creating a heavy period and trying to fix it, your periods get heavier and heavier and heavier, and you eventually get more scar tissue. So that was, looking down at my history, that was where we had concluded I definitely have scarring, and we need to see what we can do to see if we can get it cleaned out. So I went on the Lupron shot, and I'm in my junior year of high school. Not high school. I'm in my junior year of college at this point. And I will definitely say that the time that I was on Lupron, just in terms of the way I was feeling physically, it was nice. I did have one point where the way that the pharmacy had split up my medication had kind of destroyed the cycle for me, and I did end up in the hospital because I'd had so much bleeding in such a short amount of time that my body flipped out. And I ended up having to go to the hospital. My parents took me home. It was really difficult. It was a hard thing to go through because I was tired of having hospital visits. So after this, this happened, we were able to get everything back on track. I was on a Lupron for another 6 months, and then my doctor took me off. And I will say, those 6 months were nice. I didn't really have to worry about a lot. I didn't have any periods. I didn't have any random bleeding. I still had a little bit of discomfort, but it was bearable. It was bearable to the point where I didn't really notice it, and that was nice. So my doctor took me off of the Lupron, I would say May. Yeah, I was done in May. And from then, for the next about 3 or 4 months, I didn't really have any issues either because the Lupron was still in my system. And it takes about 3 to 4 months for your body to get back on track. And around August, my period started again. And it was just as painful. It was just as heavy. And at this point, I'm going into my senior year of college. At that point, I was relatively disheartened because I really thought that, man, hey, I felt so good being on this shot. It has to be working. That was just my mindset. I was like, this has to be working. This is a good thing. And, I mean, we went through a lot of hell with the pharmacy with that shot. There was a lot going on with that. And I was still happy because, I was feeling good. My parents were happy because I was feeling good. And they were willing to put up with the price tag of the medication and the struggles that came with working with that pharmacy. So we just continued on. So at this point, I'm back at school, and this is really leading up to now with everything that's happening. Like I said, my periods were just as bad, but I just dealt with it. I didn't have as much bleeding in between, which was nice, so I wasn't always feeling like I had to carry an arsenal the way I did in previous years. But, I definitely felt like crap all the time. I was just really tired. I felt really gross. So about a few weeks after midterm, I'd had another period. I want to say that was my third period within that semester. And that led to the worst ovarian cyst as well as ovarian cyst pain that I've ever had. I had started my period the day before, and I wasn't feeling great. I felt really terrible. I felt really crummy, but that kind of comes with the territory. I was like, I just deal with it. I went to class the next day, got some breakfast, and I'm sitting in my bed, and next thing I know, I just had that feeling again, like someone had just come in and stabbed me. But this pain that I was feeling was 5 times worse than what I had experienced the first time and the other times that I had ovarian cysts. It was to the point where I was nauseous, I was vomiting. I eventually blacked out for a little bit. I had a panic attack. It took everything in me to get myself together, to call the people that I needed to call to get help. They had me rushed to the hospital, and in being there, getting more imaging done, they did more ultrasounds, internal and external, as well as a CT scan, and they found that not only did I have an ovarian cyst, but I definitely had a lesion that they could see on my right ovary. Um, and this was a big wake up call for me because I've clearly had a lot of issues going down the line. But one thing that I will say is, going up to this point, I had never had visible damage. I'd never had damage that anyone could pinpoint on an ultrasound or anything else for that matter. So, in hearing this and talking to the doctors, it really woke me up when my dad looked at me and he said, I would much rather not be a grandfather than have to continue to watch you suffer like this. And that really hit me. With talking to my dad, with getting all that information and going back to my doctor and weighing out what aren't really feasible, helpful options, and knowing that I have all of this damage now that can't be reversed, that can't be fixed, and that I will continue to have this damage because at this point, the ovarian cysts that I have are hemorrhagic, and what that means is I'm not just getting that cyst on my ovary. That cyst is actually causing blood vessels to burst, and the blood from that is causing my ovaries to swell. So I will continue to have visible damage from these. And in knowing all of that, I have decided that at the age of 22, in my last year of college, I am taking a semester off, and I am going to have a partial to full hysterectomy, depending on what surgeons find at the time. I can't say that I'm necessarily happy about having to do it, and that just comes with the fact that I do want to be a parent at some point. And I definitely envision, growing up and getting married and having my own children. But I came to the realization that from middle school up to now, I have never really had a consistent, lengthy amount of time where I wasn't dealing with some type of pain. And all of that pain, all the things that I have gone through have led me to this point. And my body is really showing me that it's time. In a lot of ways, I've been a slave to my body for a very long time. I can't go out the way I want to. When I do go out, I have to take who knows how many pads and tampons to feel comfortable, to feel like I can actually go out and not be a burden. It's one of those things for me where I'm tired of being tired. And we hear this a lot from people, but I'm too young to feel this old. This is something that is not necessarily common women my age, but this does happen. And I have to play the cards that have been handed to me. And right now, this seems like the right thing to do. This feels like the right thing to do because even though, yes, I'm going to be getting rid of probably my uterus and at least one of my ovaries, I will be giving up a piece of myself. I'm going to be gaining so much back because I'm going to be able to live. I'm going to be able to function as a young woman in her 20s. I'm going to be able to be that amazing student that I strive to be every single day. I'm going to be able to be that amazing friend that I strive to be every single day. That amazing daughter. that amazing advocate. But most of all, and this was something that I realized, in doing this, I'm giving myself the opportunity one day to be an amazing mother. I sat down and I really thought about, through these years, I've been on so much medication. Trial drugs for my chronic migraines, pain meds from different surgeries, from different injuries, all of the birth control that I've been on for my endometriosis, the Lupron that I was on for my endometriosis, and definitely the Lupron and the Depo shot have definitely caused changes within my reproductive system. And anyone that's been on Depo knows that Depo is notorious for thinning out the uterine lining anyway. So, and looking at all those things that I've been on, I know that I'm going to be a parent one day. Whether I have my own children, whether I'm able to harvest some of my eggs and I have a surrogate, or whether I adopt, I'm going to be a parent. I know that I will because it's what I want. And the more I continue to take these medications, the more I continue to be on drug trials, the more chance I have to shorten my lifespan. And the one thing that I don't want is to bring children in this world and not be able to watch them grow up because I did all of this to my body in my 20s. Because I worked so hard to have a kid in my 20s. And then eventually I get to a place where I can't have children. And with that as well, as I stated previously, cancer runs rampant through my family. My dad has dealt with cancer. Both of my grandmothers have dealt with cancer. And with all the damage that I have, my body is working so hard to repair itself. And that's not possible right now. And I don't want anything to metastasize. I don't want to open myself up to the opportunities of developing cancer at a young age because I was trying to hold on to something that more than likely can't be kept. So, really this channel, this video, everything that I'm doing right now, coming on and talking to you guys about this, I'm doing this not just because it will keep me on track. I'm doing this because I wish that when all of this started, I had talked more, and I wish that I had someone to relate to. I wish that I had someone my age to talk to. And any woman that's my age right now knows how that feels, because we go through these things, but we go through them in silence. We go through so much pain and agony. We lose so much dignity in silence. And I don't want that to be normal anymore. I want women's health issues and abnormalities to be normal so that we can actually reach out and help our women. I know that I genuinely wish that I had more people my age to talk to when this was happening. And because I didn't have that, my goal is to be that for someone else. So for that girl who is ruining her clothes every day, and that girl who's embarrassed because she messed up her dad's car seat, or that girl who was completely mortified because she was walking through the store and she bled so much that she had to run to the bathroom because everyone could see. I've been that girl, and I know that more of those girls are out there. And I want to be that advocate, that voice for them, that place they have to go to when they say, I don't know what's happening, this doesn't seem right, what do I do, who do I talk to? Because one of my biggest regrets is that I didn't talk. I didn't go to my mom and talk about these issues the way that I should have, because I thought that it was normal. You know, you hear so much talk about, oh, my bad period this, my bad period that, and you think that what you're going through is normal because we all tend to generalize the things that we feel as women when we're on our periods, because we feel like we can't complain because this is what happens to all of us. But if I had talked to my mom, I think I would have learned more about my body. I would have had more of an opportunity to really find out why I was having those heavy periods and try to alleviate it, because my mom didn't know that my periods were that bad until I was about 17. It was right after my ankle surgery and I was in a cast, and my period had started shortly after that surgery. And I had gone to the bathroom to try to, take care of myself, and I looked down and there's blood everywhere. And because I was in a cast, I couldn't do anything about it. And I had definitely become one of those girls who was really good at cleaning up after herself. I was so good at cleaning up after myself to the point where people don't believe me sometimes when I tell them how bad my bleeding has been. And, I called my mom and I was just in tears. I was like, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened, but there's blood everywhere and I can't clean it up. I can't stand up long enough to clean it up. And she was like, don't worry about it. I'll get it. She thought it was just a little bit. But it wasn't. It was bad. And when she got home and, she took care of everything, she was shook because she didn't realize how terrible everything had really been for me. And I think that moment really put it into perspective for her, what was going on with me and how I was feeling. So, with that, I want to say to everyone, please take care of yourselves, especially my ladies out there. If you know that something's not normal, go to a doctor, talk to other people, get recommendations. If you don't like what you hear from one doctor, go to a second and a third. Advocate for yourself, because no one is going to take care of you the way that you take care of you. That is just straight up, downright God's honest truth. If I had gone down the path that some of these doctors had tried to take me while I was on this journey, I don't know where I would be right now. I'd probably be in a world of pain, way more than I already am. So, if this speaks to you, if this video and this channel speaks to you, if you know someone who needs to hear something like this, or if you just really want to understand what these things are so that you can be a supporter and an advocate for any woman that you may encounter that's going through this, please like this, please comment, tell me the things that you've been through, the things that you've noticed, the things that you want to learn, and please share this video, because if we don't get this out there, we're not going to be able to open up that window of opportunity to really talk about this and to really make this a thing. I want this to be normalized. I want this to be something that we talk about and that we understand and that we keep everyone engaged in, so that our women don't have to go through it alone and we don't have to go through it in silence anymore. So thank you guys so much for going on this journey with me. I do plan on vlogging when I go on my appointments and while I'm on, this personal journey to a hysterectomy. I do actually have a couple of appointments coming on soon, so I plan on doing a little bit of vlogging then, and hopefully I'll have a vlog up at least once a week to kind of show you guys what the process is. It's definitely different. I'm doing some physical therapy right now, and I have some preparatory appointments with my gynecologist coming up, so I'm definitely going to keep you guys engaged on that. Also, go ahead and check out my different social media platforms. I have an Instagram dedicated to promoting this channel. It's at The Third Eye Journey. And on that, I will be alerting you guys when I have new videos, but I'll also be posting tips and recipes that I discovered throughout this journey and things that have really helped me with pain and with stress. I'll also be posting some of these things on my personal blog on Facebook that is the Third Eye Journey. So go ahead, get on, engage, like, comment, subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this is a long video, but I really appreciate it. You guys have a good one. Have a happy new year. Bye.